Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine sends millions fleeing, shattering lives, splitting families as women and children leave the men to fight.
I can't talk about this topic without tears. I just start crying. I'm sorry for the children, for the country, for everyone.
Millions of refugees have already fled Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands more are displaced. Their journeys and their legacies now on The Inside Story, Ukraine's Refugee Crisis.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Pursuti, VOA's senior Washington correspondent on a rainy day in the nation's capital. This is the Ukrainian embassy. It's quite a modest building along a busy main street in Washington's prestigious Georgetown neighborhood. You can see all these flowers, all these letters of support for Ukraine, which has been under Russian bombardment for the last 3 weeks. You can see all the notes. This one says, Iranians support for Ukraine's struggle for freedom and national sovereignty. And look in these bouquets. There are a lot of sunflowers. That's because the Ukrainian national flower is a sunflower. Back in 1996, when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, the countries of Russia, Ukraine, and the United States decided to plant sunflowers on the missile field. Meantime, in the news lately, President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed Ukraine would not give up and would not lose, pleading to the British Parliament for more help. The UK is following the American lead in banning imports of Russian oil. But economic sanctions will take time to tighten the pressure on Russia. And that's the time the Ukrainian people don't necessarily have. So we will take you inside the humanitarian crisis Russia's attack is creating. More than 2 million Ukrainians have fled the country, according to the United Nations, half of them children. Now, follow me on this statistic. The number of refugees in 2 weeks from Ukraine is more than the number that fled to Europe from Syria in 2015 and 2016 combined. More than half are landing in Poland, with Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania also taking in a significant number. Our Henry Ridgewell begins our coverage from the Polish border town of Przemysl.
Shattered lives, reduced to a suitcase full of clothes and a few cherished mementos, thrown together in the panicked final hours of escape. Ukraine's western city of Lviv has become a major hub for Ukrainians fleeing Russia's mortars and missiles. The women and children leave behind their homes and their husbands, their fathers, their sons. The men must stay behind to fight. After days of exhaustion and terror, the train carries them over the border and into the safety of Poland. The first stop is Przemysl. Here they can change trains to travel across Poland and beyond. This family is hoping to reach Lithuania.
We will go on. We will get through it. I hope that everything will end well and that our Ukraine will win. I want to return. I want to go home.
Each and every family has a similar story of loss and fear. More than 1 million Ukrainians have now fled the country, according to the United Nations. Most have escaped to Poland.
Many of these Ukrainian refugees have friends and family in Poland or elsewhere in Europe where they can stay. But as the war intensifies, the numbers crossing the border increases, so the pressure on Poland intensifies.
Not all have a place to stay. Caleb Poitier from Republic of Congo was studying electrical engineering in Odessa. He fled with his Ukrainian girlfriend as the Russian attacks began.
For 1 week, we slept at the border on the way to get here. Now we're fine. I can say that in Poland, we've been well received so far. We are here to wait to take the bus to go to the other side of Europe, to other countries, maybe to get to France.
Volunteers from dozens of countries have come here to help, offering food, clothes and shelter, and car rides to destinations across Europe. hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are also fleeing by car or on foot, dragging their few belongings across the border, a frontier that has become a geopolitical fault line across Europe.
Every few minutes there are busloads of Ukrainian refugees being taken from the border here at Medica to reception centres further inside Poland.
But it's not one-way traffic. Many Ukrainians are heading back home to fight. VOA spoke to these former soldiers who did not want to show their faces on camera.
It's a normal reaction. We will beat Putin and everything will be fine. We will send Russian tanks and armored vehicles straight to hell.
Ukrainians are determined to survive, to win this war. But it is inflicting a terrible human cost. Families divided, a country torn apart, Ukraine's children forced to flee their homeland to an unknown future. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News on the Poland-Ukraine border.
Hungary also shares a border with Ukraine along a road that's backed up for many kilometers. That's where we find our Gabor Anchin.
This border bridge between Hungary and Ukraine is symbolic. It was here that the last Soviet soldier left Hungary 30 years ago, crossing over to what was then the USSR, now an independent Ukraine. The departure marked for many the end of Russia's domination of Central Europe, which many believed would be forever. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sent hundreds of thousands fleeing across borders like this one with Hungary. A few steps inside Ukraine, VOA caught up with a group that included Yana, a 31-year-old mum who fled the town of Bucha near Kyiv with her children. She points in the direction of the home she left abruptly and may never see again.
This is the road in Bucha where my daughter was going to kindergarten.
Yana did not give her surname and asked not to show her face. Others did not mind being identified.
My name is Marta Kotek. I'm 30 years old. I'm delivery manager. What I left basically all of my life there. I just lost my whole life that I was building there, and yeah, that's crazy. Capital of your country is under the bomb attack. It's awful. So in the middle of Europe in the 21st century.
In the last few days, more than 100,000 people have arrived here in Hungary, and hundreds of thousands have poured into other nations, especially Poland. The numbers are growing rapidly, and calls for more help for Ukraine are mounting.
We are begging the whole world to help us, because this is our land, this is our country. We don't want to move anywhere. We are Ukrainians. We are the family of 44 million of people. And we ask Russian people to go to the streets and demonstrate that they are people, basically.
Just as Russia launched its assault on Ukraine, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán relaxed Hungary's stringent migration policies, saying his nation would rise to the challenge of taking care of Ukrainian refugees, quote, quickly and efficiently, end quote. Local governments have set up reception centres and temporary accommodation. State-funded aid organisations are providing food packages and charities are collecting donations across Hungary.
We brought baby care products, toiletries, long-lasting food products, fever medications, women's hygiene products. One doesn't need to care about what the other's origin is. We need to help. Here is the proof. We have to be there.
As the invasion intensifies and the violence grows, the journey to safe ground is getting even more difficult, with refugees waiting days to cross borders. Only a few days ago, this was one of the easier routes to safety, but that is rapidly changing. For Gabor Anchin in Lanya, Hungary, John Spear, VOA News.
Stopped at the border, prohibited from boarding trains, enduring racist tactics at checkpoints in Poland. That's what many African students say they face trying to leave Ukraine. With the mass exodus continuing, who is allowed to cross the border and who is not? VOA's Betty Ayoub has more.
African students are among the hundreds of thousands of people trying to flee Ukraine into Poland, Romania, and other neighboring countries. Liberian-born Augustine Akoikoli has been studying medicine in the southwest Ukrainian city of Ternopil. He left home Saturday for a 6-hour journey by cab and on foot toward the southern border with Romania. At a border crossing, he stood in line all night in freezing temperatures before being granted entry to Suceava, Romania. Ukrainian authorities have prioritized Ukrainian women and children over foreigners trying to leave the country, which Kohli observed.
While you are in the queue, if a Ukrainian comes, you have to shift and make way for that Ukrainian to go to the front. It's winter in Ukraine. It was very cold. My hands, my feet, and everything were numb from the cold. There were even some students that passed out due to hypothermia. There was no shelter, no feeding. At that point, you had to do everything on your own.
There were even acts of aggressive behavior captured on video by Kohli's friend while they waited. The video clip showed several uniformed men on the Ukrainian side of the border shoving people who Kohli called foreign students sitting on the ground and barely visible behind a parked vehicle. It is unclear if these are Ukrainian border guards shoving people. The hashtag Africans in Ukraine has been trending on Twitter, with posts of video clips and texts alleging mistreatment of Africans trying to get out of Ukraine. Chizoba Okwar, a Nigerian-born resident of New York, has been sharing some of these videos on her blog, Africans in Diaspora.
Since the invasion, they've been trying to get either from the war zone to the safe zones or to other countries like Romania, Poland, and so on. But it has been absolutely difficult for them to do that because it's either they're not let on the buses and trains, or when they do get on the buses and trains, they're literally pulled out.
European officials say everyone is being treated equally once they cross out of Ukraine. Poland's ambassador to Nigeria, Joanna Tarnowska, told local media everyone is receiving equal treatment at the border, adding some Nigerian nationals have crossed into Poland. In a tweet sent Tuesday, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said, "Africans seeking evacuation are our friends and need to have equal opportunities to return to their home countries safely." But the African Union's top leaders released a statement Monday saying they were disturbed by reports that African citizens in Ukraine were not being allowed to cross the border to safety. A State Department spokesman told VOA any act of racial discrimination is inexcusable. And the European Commission also told VOA that it would soon propose to activate the Temporary Protection Directive to aid people fleeing Ukraine. Kohli, the Liberian student, said that once he crossed into Romania, everything went smoothly.
They had free food, like everything at that point was free. You can take whatever you want, you can eat whatever you want that was available there for free. And they even had some blankets because of the cold, like this one.
Kohli said new arrivals were told they would get help with food and lodging for 30 days. He then had this appeal to the international community.
These are difficult times for foreign students around Ukraine. So I'm calling on the international community, whatever way in which they can help those foreign students that are going to other European countries to seek refuge. They should try as much as possible in their own way to help.
For Betty Ayoub, Carol Gunsberg, VOA News.
After seeing 3 reports on the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, it helps to hear a historical perspective. So to get that, I interviewed Professor Keith Darden from American University. Professor Darden is with the School of International Service. His specialty is Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia.
It's obvious the Europeans are welcoming the Ukrainians, but at what time do these countries establish limits?
It's really hard to handle that many refugees. And many have gone to Poland, but a lot are going to Moldova as well. I think we're going to see an increase in flows to Moldova as the war progresses in the south, right? So it's a really short trip from Odessa and Mykolaiv. to Moldova, so we'll see more pressure there. So I think some of it is going to just be these are countries that are going to have a hard time assimilating this large of a refugee population, and they're going to need a lot of external assistance to do that.
Let me ask you about that long-term strategy, because a lot of observers say this is unlike World War II because it is a larger group and they're arriving quicker. So what can be the long-term plan here?
Well, I do think that Poland has taken in a large number of Ukrainian refugees, in part because they do feel a kinship with Ukraine, that large parts of Ukraine and Belarus were part of Poland in the interwar period. And so there is a sense in Poland that these are not really foreigners. And so some of those people might be settled in Poland for the long term, particularly as part of a kind of a, I think Poland's probably going to get on board with EU refugee policies in a way that it has been very resistant up until now. And they can probably get some significant funds to help settle people. And it could, in the long run, be pretty stable. But, the flows are likely to continue to increase. So it's 2 million as of today. It might be 4 million next week, and so I think we have to think about getting people into the United States, into the UK, Canada. It's going to be a broader distribution of those populations, and also trying to settle this conflict so that these people could actually go home.
Professor Darden, you're a man of history. So if you could tell us, just what do you personally see as the future, the next week, the next month? Is it totally in the hands of Putin? Or do you see this leading to an end eventually because of the pressure that we've been putting on Russia?
I think it's not totally in the hands of Putin. It's partially in the hands of Zelensky. So there are ongoing talks between the government in Ukraine and the Kremlin. It's just that what is being asked of the Ukrainian government is a very hard ask. But it might be worth it to end that conflict. The sanctions make it hard for the Russians to sustain this. They're going to have to move back to a more autarkic economic model that they are going to live a lot worse than they do now. And so that's going to cause pressures at home. So the Russians kind of want to settle this, I think, but also want it settled in a way that meets their war aims. And I think the Ukrainian side would also like to settle it so that their cities are not destroyed and their people are not fleeing to Europe.
Covering the attack on Ukraine exposes journalists to tremendous danger. A cameraman was killed in the early days of the attack, as we look at the risks in this week's Press Freedom Spotlight.
On March 1st, the sound of Russian missile strike on a TV tower in Kiev could be heard over Ukraine's capital. Later, local police pulled the bodies from the tower, including the body of Yevgeny Sakun, a cameraman who worked for Live TV. His body had a press pass in a pocket.
He was involved in the news show crew of Live TV, together with the TV crews of other large newsrooms on national Ukrainian TV.
His colleagues say that during military actions, journalists work mostly on a volunteer basis.
4 of our main media groups have united and we're doing joint coverage of the whole of Ukraine. So the story of all journalists is not the story of particular editorial task anymore or particular channel. It's a story of working together in the media sphere in order to give viewers a clear image that reflects the facts. We don't yet know whether Sakun was working or was at the tower for another reason.
Sakun's family has also been missing since the cameraman's death. 4 other bodies were also found at the tower. It's not yet clear if the other victims were his colleagues, family, or visitors.
We had to get in touch with his relatives, but we can't reach anyone. And there is no one at apartment where he lived. But because of the ongoing war, many people had to evacuate, so there is hope his relatives and close ones are alive.
The 49-year-old was a Kiev native. His colleagues say he was very sociable, kind, and professional. For the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, Sakun's death is a direct attack on freedom.
This is an evident direct attack on the freedom of speech. The information about his death is a powerful message that creates fear and anxiety for all Ukrainian journalists. We all realize any one of us could have been in his place, any Ukrainian journalist.
The Committee to Protect Journalists issued this statement.
We are deeply saddened by the death of Ukrainian journalist Yevgeny Sakun, who was killed in a reckless Russian attack on civilian infrastructure in Kyiv. All parties to the conflict must protect local and international journalists and stop targeting media facilities and equipment.
Besides Sakun, the TV tower attack killed 4 others and wounded 5. For Irina Matvichuk, Anna Rice, VOA News.
As the war continues between the neighboring countries, future ventures in space exploration now hang in the balance. VOA's Arash Arabasadi explains in our special edition of The Week in Space.
We begin in Ukraine, where Russia's invasion of its neighbor continues and aerial images are playing a key role. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine released these unverified videos claiming to show drone strikes destroying Russian military convoys, launchers, and missile systems. Meanwhile, space technology company Maxar released these images showing parts of the 64-kilometer Russian convoy that stalled in its push to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Recent Russian missile strikes destroyed civilian infrastructure, including a TV tower, killing at least 5 people. A plea to help Ukrainians stay connected made by the country's vice prime minister led billionaire SpaceX founder Elon Musk to act.
And liftoff of Falcon 9, Starlink 4.11.
Starlink is the global broadband subsidiary of SpaceX. It uses thousands of satellites to deliver high-speed internet to underserved parts of the world. If you have a terminal like the ones recently delivered to Ukraine, you can get online.
As the Russians clamp down, as they restrict access, reporting is going to become a lot more scarce. People can still send out their videos of whatever atrocities these forces are committing or whatever. That's going to be really important. Putin's forces are not going to be able to hide from the world because of this access to internet.
As recently as the past few weeks, the prospect of terminating the decades-long partnership aboard the International Space Station seemed impossible. A lot has since changed. The head of Russia's space program sent a series of tweets in which he said the ISS would crash to Earth if Russia decided to leave. Elon Musk replied to the tweet with a SpaceX logo and said his company would step in if Russia backed out.
They may be threatening to pull out. I think the bigger question is, do we allow them to stay? A big part of me hopes that we do. I spent years and years and years of my life trying to work on this partnership, but Mr. Putin really seems to have lost his mind, and I don't know where that's going to end. It might end up in a dangerous place, and so we'll see. This is a place I never thought we'd be at.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine could also derail a joint mission to Mars that Russia and the European Space Agency had planned for later this year. A project delayed since 2020 due to the pandemic now seems even less likely because of sanctions on Moscow, according to the ESA, which will have to wait longer to attempt to land its first rover on Mars. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Back again in front of the Ukrainian embassy, where the items of encouragement just keep coming. All the flowers, all the notes, all the posters, even a ribbon in blue and yellow, the colors of Ukraine. And check out this message. The soul of freedom is deathless. It cannot and will not perish. Whether you know somebody in Ukraine or someone who's been to Ukraine who can tell you about the conflict, it never really hits home as much as sometimes photos do. Photos seem to touch our hearts very differently. And so today we leave you with a photo montage. Meantime, for all of us behind the scenes here at Voice of America who brought you this program, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. Follow me on Twitter at CarolynVOA. Connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. And stay up to date online at voanews.com. See you next week for another The Inside Story.